Hey everyone, I'm James Lynch, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, I'm going to be taking a look at the January 14th bantamweight fight between Hayoni Barcelos and Umar Nurmagomedov. But before I give you my preview and pick, you know the drill. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Those three things really do help out this channel big time. If you've never watched the show before, I basically go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles, and then I give you my pick at the end of this thing. These things could have an impact, whether you're breaking down the fight or not, but I kind of like to look at every little angle going into fights. And this actually is a fight that's on the prelims. I don't usually do fights like this, but I think this fight's a lot better than people are giving it credit for. I feel like it's kind of flying under the radar. This should be on the main card. I know there's some other important matchups, but really excited to break this one down. Big one here for the bantamweight division. And let's get into it right now. A quick tail of the tape here. You can see Umar Nurmagomedov 15-0 compared to 17-3 with Hayoni Barcelos, 26 years old compared to 35, 5'8" to 5'7", 69 to 67. So you'll see there, Umar Nurmagomedov going to be a little bit bigger and a little bit younger in this fight. Keep in mind, this is going to be taking place at the UFC Apex. This is UFC Vegas 67, so smaller cage. Not sure who that really favors here, but we'll dig into everything we can. First, let's start with Umar Nurmagomedov, the undefeated bantamweight. You can see there he's 15-0. He's got 1 knockout, 7 submissions, and 7 decisions. He's the number 11th ranked bantamweight. Like I mentioned there, he is 26 years old. He's 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. He's 9 years younger, and he's going to have a 1-inch height and 2-inch reach advantage over Hayoni Barcelos. Some notable accolades for Umar Nurmagomedov include that he was a combo Sambo championship gold medalist in 2015. He's the older brother of Bellator lightweight champion Usman Nurmagomedov, and he's the cousin of one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not the greatest, Khabib Nurmagomedov. He trains out of Eagles MMA and AKA. He's only got performance of the night bonus one time, and that was against Sergey Morozov. Let's go all the way back to his career. You can see here, Umar made his amateur debut back in May of 2016. He made his MMA debut in December of 2016. By that point, just to give you a little bit of context and the experience gap here a little bit, Hayoni Barcelos had 12 fights by the time Umar Nurmagomedov made his professional debut. Just something to keep in mind there, but with the age gap, kind of makes sense. Did not make his UFC debut until January of 2021. That was against Sergey Morozov, and Hayoni Barcelos already had 5 UFC fights at that point. You can see there, Umar is 3-0 in the UFC. He's got 2 finishes. No notable wins, really. Morozov, I wouldn't really call him a notable opponent. I know Brian Kelleher's a veteran, but still never a ranked opponent. The Nate Maness fight, I guess Maness was 14-1 at the time, so that, was an interesting, sort of tidbit there going in, but still Maness was never ranked either here. So that's the interesting thing here. Umar fighting someone that, again, a lot of people know a little bit better. I think Barcelos, not a household name, but someone you know a little bit more than some of the other names here, I would say, in terms of what Barcelos has done in his career. So we're still sort of waiting for that, ranked opponent, but I think a lot of it is, the fact that a lot of these guys don't want to fight him. I think that's sort of the main reason here. They look at that last name, Nurmagomedov, and a lot of these guys are like, I'm good. I don't want to take that fight. So that's something to keep in mind too. Umar has not had any sort of like major injuries or anything like that. Do want to point out some fights that did not take place. He was supposed to fight Nathaniel Wood. This would have been a good fight back then, back in his UFC debut. I was supposed to fight July 2020 UFC Fight Night. Withdrew from that fight due to his coach passing away. Of course, Khabib's father passing away. So Khabib's father, his uncle, ended up passing away. So he withdrew from that fight. Supposed to fight Sergey Morozov back in October of 2020. Had an illness in that fight. That was supposed to be in the Khabib and Gaethje card. And then was supposed to fight Jack Shore earlier this year, but had to withdraw from that fight as well due to undisclosed reasons there. So probably would have liked to have been a little bit more active, although saying that he made his debut, last January. But I think that's one thing we would like to see a little bit more, is a little bit more activity there. He's had a few layoffs already in his UFC career, going from Sergey Morozov to Brian Kelleher. There was a 409-day layoff, and then going from Nate Maness to this fight, there'll be a 203-day layoff. So again, I think Nurmagomedov, once he starts getting, the opponents accepting fights and him being a little bit more active, we'll hear a little bit more about him. Obviously getting a lot of praise from Daniel Cormier, who I think had him in his top 5 bantamweights right now. So obviously on the radar of a lot of even casual fans, I think, now with that mention there by DC. You can see there, Umar has not had any close fights. The Nate Maness fight was not close. It was a decision win, but I don't think anyone on this planet thought that Nate Maness won, including Nate himself. So really good career so far, only 3 fights, but I think, again, this fight will be the start of hopefully a lot of fights for him next year, and he's really going to make some noise in that bantamweight division, which is already pretty deep as it is. So that's everything you need to know about Umar Nurmagomedov. Let's get to his opponent, Hayoni Barcelos. I mentioned it there. 17-3 record. Hayoni Barcelos is the number 11th. Sorry, no, that's wrong. That's him. Hayoni Barcelos is not ranked, although he's one of those guys that, you know, could make a case for being ranked. He's looked quite great. He's 17-3, like I mentioned there. He's got 8 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 7 decisions. You know, a Brazilian guy, you automatically think great jiu-jitsu game, but just 2 submissions in his career, which is not a lot at all. He's 35 years old. He's 5'7" with a 67-inch reach. You can see there he is a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but again, we don't really see him get a lot of submission wins. So that's just one sort of thing to keep in mind there. Made his MMA debut in March of 2012. You can see there. So again, a lot more MMA experience than Umar, and then made his UFC debut back in July 2018. Hayoni Barcelos is 6-2 in the UFC. He's got 3 finishes. Some notable wins include, he's only got 1 notable win, actually, if you're sort of looking at who he's fought, and that's Chris Gutierrez, and a win that has aged quite well considering what Gutierrez has done since that loss. In fact, I don't think Gutierrez has lost since then, right? If I'm not mistaken. Let's double check that before someone complains. Yeah, he's not lost since that fight. So that's a really good win to have in the resume if you see what Gutierrez has done since then. He's got 2 losses. Tamir Valiev losing a majority decision in that one. We'll talk about that in a second. And Victor Henry, which was one of the biggest upsets this year. I know it was at the beginning of the year, but if you look at the odds, Henry was a huge underdog. I don't know what happened to Barcelos in that fight, but that was a fight I thought he would win, and he didn't. And yeah, not looking good from that perspective. Let's talk about the Tamir Valiev fight, which was a majority decision loss. I went back and looked at that one. That was UFC on ESPN plus 48 back in June of 2021. I went back and looked at the media scorecards, and again, you can find these on MMADecisions.com. 8 media members scoring the fight for Valiev, 5 media members scoring the fight a draw, and only 1 media member scoring the fight for Hayoni Barcelos, despite the fact that Barcelos, if you remember in that fight, he knocked down Valiev a number of times. So interesting result there. Majority feeling like Valiev did have the should have got the nod there, but it's also interesting that 5 media members scoring the fight a draw. Now, Barcelos has only had 1 layoff, and that was from Victor Henry to Trevin Jones. There was a 210-day layoff. But other than that, he's been pretty active. One thing we should mention is he had a big gap going from being an RFA and being the champion there to making his UFC debut. There was like almost a 2-year layoff, or close to a 2-year layoff since then. Had a couple fights that had fallen out there. You can see there. So yeah, that's just one sort of thing to note. But overall in his UFC career, he's been about a 2-fight-a-year guy, which is always what you want to see from fighters in the weight class. Let's talk about some injuries and some other interesting tidbits here that I wanted to get into. Barcelos was supposed to face Merab Dvalishvili. Imagine if that fight would have taken place. That would have was supposed to take place December 2020. Barcelos was removed due to a medical suspension related to his latest bout in November against Khalid Taha. So he's still medically suspended, was not able to take the fight. Kind of a weird situation there. Barcelos was then supposed to fight Rafael Sunsao, another notable fight that I think would have got him over the hump a little bit. That was February 2021. Sunsao ended up pulling out of the fight in early February, and Marcelo Rozo was named the replacement in that fight, but then Barcelos himself had to get out of the fight because of a positive COVID test. So again, some bad luck here for Barcelos in terms of what he's done. Barcelos has always been one of those guys to me, kind of like Umar in a way, but Barcelos more so because he's been in the weight class longer. A guy that I think is just very underrated. Outside of the Victor Henry win and maybe the Valiev fight, he's looked pretty good. And he's, like I said, the win over, he's got a win over Said Nurmagomedov as well. Chris Gutierrez. These are all pretty solid victories. Now, the one thing with Barcelos that we should mention, he's fought a number of fights up a weight class at featherweight. He's actually got 13 fights at featherweight. Went back and looked here, and he's got 7 bantamweight fights. The fight against Umar will be his 8th bantamweight fight. So one thing to consider, a guy dropping down, typically you'll see someone maybe be a little bit stronger in the fight, but we'll see because Umar's looking pretty strong here himself. Now, like I mentioned, this fight is on the prelims. It's only 3 rounds. I think this definitely should be a main card fight, but what do I know? Yeah, we don't have odds for this fight yet, but if I had to guess, just because of the last name and because of the fact he's undefeated, I'm going to go a little bit bold here. I'm going to say that Nurmagomedov's probably going to be like a 3-1 favorite. If I had to guess, you even look here on Tapology, you've got 94% of people picking Nurmagomedov, only 6% picking Barcelos. And it's understandable for a variety of reasons. And I'll give you my pick here in 1 second. Umar's looked great. I mean, he really hasn't taken any damage. The Nate Maness win, which I think they were kind of in the same spot. Maness, again, had looked great at, in the UFC, and Umar just dominated him with that grappling, with the wrestling. Very impressive. He's got he obviously has a ground game too, submitting Brian Kelleher. This is a guy that is young and continues to get better, and that's a dangerous combination for a guy in Hayoni Barcelos, who's 35. You kind of know what you're getting with Barcelos. Good stand-up, little bit of knockout power there, solid guy, durable. I mean, we've seen his losses. They're fights that go the distance. But we have seen fights where he hasn't performed, like the Victor Henry fight. I know, again, that was just one fight, but I was really disappointed in how he was in that fight. And you saw Henry after that fight, he lost his next bout. I'm trying to remember who he lost to, but I remember just thinking, like, this is not a guy that, like, it's not even like an up-and-comer he didn't know anything about in terms of Victor Henry. Yeah, he lost to Rafael Sunsao in the fight after that, which was kind of the opposite situation, where Henry got all this hype from beating Barcelos, and then everyone was counting out a Sunsao, and Sunsao put on like a vintage performance here. So just such a weird fight. You get those every now and then, like Michael Johnson knocking out Dustin Poirier, or like, I don't know, Alex Hernandez knocking out Beneil Dariush. Even then, those were like, punches that happened to land. They were good punches, but to lose a decision, just very, very, very odd. And honestly, if that fight hadn't happened, I think this fight should be a little bit closer, but I got to go Umar Nurmagomedov in this fight. Now, here's the thing. He's fighting a black belt in Hayoni Barcelos. And like I mentioned there, we don't see Barcelos use his ground game very well, but his submission defense has been decent. I mean, we haven't really seen a ton of it. But if you look at it here, like, he got submitted in 2014. That he's only been submitted one time in his entire career. And that was by submission in that fight. I don't think with this just being a 3-round fight that Umar is going to be able to do that. Maybe he will. And maybe this is a fight where he goes in there, he makes a statement, and we start really progressing him up high in the weight class. But if we're looking at the stats here, it tells me more often than not, Umar's probably going to win a decision here. If Umar had finished Nate Maness in his last fight and continued that streak of, finishing his opponents, I might, lean more towards Umar by submission here. But Barcelos is enough of a veteran and has more experience. I just don't see him getting submitted here. So my pick here is going to be Umar Nurmagomedov by decision. I will be looking for that decision prop, but I just have a feeling he's going to be a high favorite here, like minus 300 around there against Barcelos, who, like I mentioned, is a lot older. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking in this fight? I'm pretty sure most people are picking Nurmagomedov, but if you're picking Barcelos, I'd love to hear why you think he wins and how he gets this one done. Again, more than happy to discuss these fights as long as we're being cool and civil about the fight and everything. And if there's any other fights you want me to preview coming up here, just let me know in the comments. Like I mentioned, this is a prelim fight. It's just an interesting matchup. Every now and then, if I see a fight that catches my eyes, I'll definitely do a preview of it. But for the most part, it's title fights, it's main events. That's what you will see here on Early Look. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. While you're there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I already told you to subscribe. Hit that notification bell. That's what I meant to say. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.